Okay, hello year 10. So, we're going to carry on with the work on the hormones today. Now, it turns out I've got my lesson order completely wrong. I keep thinking we're going to do blood sugar homeostasis. That really is the next lesson now. But today we're going to be finishing off the introduction to hormones. We're talking about something called negative feedback. So, negative feedback is the title for today. It will come up on the board in just a second. But before we do anything else, let's just start with a starter. Make sure you've understood everything there is to know about the previous lesson. And there's 4 questions there on the board. So if you pause me for 2 minutes, I don't need them all written out in full, just the question answers probably at the back of your books will do just fine. So pause me for 2 minutes. Hopefully you did it. 4 questions. So, how do hormones move around the body was the first question. Hopefully you wrote in the bloodstream, dissolved in the bloodstream. Which is longer lasting, nervous or endocrine messaging? I hope you all wrote endocrine messaging. That's hormones. Which is faster, nervous or endocrine messaging? That's definitely nervous messaging. And where is the pituitary gland? It's found just underneath the brain, inside your head, inside your skull. Fine. If you got those 4, it's a good indication you probably remember a lot of what we did last lesson. So that's grand. Today's lesson, as I said, is on the... Oh, okay, let's do this. That's my mistake. This is another bit of work we did last lesson, and I had inserted this just to make sure we're all in the same place. Again, obviously don't draw this again. Should we say A, B, C, D down the left, and then E, F, G, H down the right? So A is the top left, and H is the bottom right. Can you write A to H in your books, and just write down which bit each letter is? So by the end of the next minute or so, you should have A to H and a name of a gland or a part of the body next to each of those letters. Pause me again. Right, so A, which is top left, should be brain. Underneath that, B is in the neck, and that's your thyroid. Underneath that, C, above your kidneys, is your adrenal gland. D, underneath that is your, well, not yours, ovaries. E, top right, is your pituitary gland. F, in the middle, is your pancreas. G, underneath that, is your kidney. And then H is your testes. So A, brain, B, thyroid, C, adrenal, D, ovary, E, pituitary, F, pancreas, G, kidney, and H, testes. Fine. And I don't know why I said that, because there are your answers. Right. Now, today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about negative feedback. We're going to talk about 2 different hormones and how each of them works. And we're going to talk about how they each work in regard to negative feedback. So, I'm going to start off with adrenaline. Now, adrenaline is a hormone you will probably have heard of, and that's what we're going to start off with. 3 questions there. Have a look at this. Now, adrenaline is a hormone that's going to increase your heart rate and how much blood glucose there is in you. Now, glucose is sugar, okay? And I want you to think about, from what we did in year 8 and 9, why might it be useful to have an increased heart rate and an increased amount of glucose in your blood? So when we're thinking about this, hopefully we've got the idea that, having a look at that photo, if you are in a stress situation, if you're in a situation where there is a need for you to take action immediately, you are going to want to be able to do a lot of respiration. Respiration is the chemical reaction that releases energy into your body, and that's happening in the mitochondria of your cells. If you remember respiration, I know you missed it in year 9, if you remember respiration at all from year 8, you'll remember that we need oxygen and glucose for that to happen. If we are increasing our heart rate, that will increase how fast we pump the oxygen and glucose around the body to our cells. And if we're increasing the amount of sugar in our blood, that will allow more sugar for respiration, more glucose for respiration. That means we'll have more energy. So if I look up in a second and a tiger walks through that door behind me, the adrenaline will immediately be released from my adrenal glands. I'll suddenly have an enormous burst of energy. And there are stories of people lifting ridiculous weights to get their children out from underneath cars, or fighting off strangers who are trying to attack them, just because adrenaline immediately gives you that massive burst of energy from respiration by increasing the oxygen and glucose your cells have. Where is the adrenal gland? Hopefully you're immediately thinking of that bit above your kidneys. So adrenaline is being released from the little hat on top of your kidneys, the adrenal glands. And then the next question is, what would happen to a person if it wasn't controlled correctly? So you've got to think about the negatives of having a large blood glucose or a large amount of oxygen, a large heart rate. So large blood glucose, well, if you keep flooding your blood with glucose, it causes issues including diabetes. And that causes all issues of itself. I'm going to talk about diabetes next lesson. It can also mean you'll just run out of glucose very quickly. You're going to store it up. If you keep releasing it into your blood, that's very bad for you because you're going to run out. If your heart rate gets too high, it can actually cause heart failure and heart attacks. So adrenaline is a very important one to control. So I'd like you to get the top note down there, adrenaline is a hormone, etc. I'd like you to write the answers we just talked about to those 3 questions in your books. Try to do it without rewinding me, to try to do it from what you remember of what I've just said. But if you can't remember, have a rewind. Do it in full sentences, please, so you can pause the video now. Right, the second of 2 hormones we're going to talk about today is thyroxine. Now, thyroxine is a hormone that controls your metabolic rate. Now, again, we would have talked about metabolism in the respiration topic last year, which you obviously missed, which is a shame. But metabolism, at a very basic level, is just all of the chemical reactions that are happening in your body, how fast they're happening. So if you have a high metabolic rate, the chemical reactions in your body will be happening fast. If you have a low metabolic rate, the chemical reactions in your body will be happening slowly. When we think of high metabolism, we often think of skinny people. When we think of a very slow metabolism, we often think of heavier people. That's because one of the chemical reactions involved in metabolism is respiration. We've also got things like the breakdowns of fats to use up for energy. And the higher your metabolism is, the faster those chemical reactions are happening, the more fat you're going to burn up, the more sugars you're going to burn up, and so often the thinner you will end up being. But it's obviously more important than that if it's controlling every single chemical reaction in your body and keeping it at a basal level. And what we're talking about when we're in a basal level is we're talking about increasing the rates of chemical reactions in your body. So basically, it's keeping it at just the right level. And the more thyroxine you have, the faster your metabolism is going to go. The less thyroxine you have, the slower your metabolism is going to go. And it's produced by your thyroid gland. So again, there's 3 questions there. I'd like you to take down those notes at the top. I'd like you to answer those 3 questions in full sentences, just like you would in class, please. So pause me, complete that, and we'll go through the answers in just a few minutes. Right, so hopefully everyone said the thyroid gland is in your throat, it's in your neck. If you had too much thyroxine for a long period of time, it will increase your metabolic rate quite dramatically. What happens then is you're going to use up a lot of your glucose and your carbohydrate reserves. You're going to burn up a lot of your fat, and you might think that's a very good thing, but if these chemical reactions are happening too fast, it actually causes a lot of issues for your body, basically running out of reserves of various chemicals. A more common issue, which is question 3, is the people having an underactive thyroid gland, i.e. a thyroid gland that just doesn't create enough thyroxine. And that causes all the chemical reactions in your body to slow down. And that can make you feel tired, it can make you feel lethargic, it can make you feel unwell, and it can cause a huge number of issues for various people. But the main kind of focus we're going to talk about right now is the slowing down of chemical reactions, leading to lethargy, tiredness. That means it's very important to control this hormone. So we're talking about two hormones here, adrenaline and thyroxine, which are extremely important in your body, but which need controlling fantastically well. We're going to talk about how we control hormones now, and this is where we come on to this term negative feedback, which was the title. We're going to take thyroxine as our example. So, we have actually, in many cases, other hormones which control the hormones we're talking about. So in this case, thyroxine is actually controlled by another hormone, TSH. Now you can call it TSH, but TSH stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. So you can imagine that thyroid stimulating hormone is probably going to stimulate the release of thyroxine from the thyroid. And we can immediately be thinking back to last lesson, what gland we think might be controlling this other gland. We know that the master gland, the gland that controls all the others, the one gland to rule them all, is the pituitary. And just as we might think, the pituitary is the one releasing the TSH. So, if you don't have enough thyroxine in your blood, the pituitary will release some TSH. If it doesn't release any TSH, you don't release any thyroxine. And so the pituitary is the one controlling, ultimately, the thyroxine. I'm going to go into a bit more detail on that, but can you first please take down these 2 bullet points? Again, I paused the video because I'm not going to stop. So, TSH, and I actually don't want you to write this down at this point. It says notes, I'd like you not to write this down. TSH causes thyroxine to be released. But another fact is, if you have a lot of thyroxine, it blocks TSH's release. So TSH increases thyroxine, thyroxine decreases TSH. Why might that be useful is the question I want you to kind of think about for a second. Why might it be useful for thyroxine to actually block TSH? And the answer is this, that it's going to control how much thyroxine you have. Now follow along with me. If I have too much thyroxine, we said thyroxine did what to TSH? Thyroxine blocks TSH. So if you've got lots of thyroxine, you're going to block TSH. There's not going to be any TSH made, or at least very low levels to be fair. If TSH is blocked, well, what's going to be the effect of that immediately? What does TSH do? Well, TSH causes thyroxine to be released. So if I block my TSH, immediately, less thyroxine is going to be produced. If less thyroxine is produced, what's going to happen? There's not going to be enough thyroxine. And so, what's going to happen if there's not enough thyroxine? Well, we said thyroxine blocks TSH. If there's not enough thyroxine, you're going to increase the amount of TSH. TSH is going to be made again. If TSH is made, what does TSH do? TSH causes thyroxine to be released. And so you have a big old cycle here. And what we should hopefully eventually see is that we get an exact balance of just the right amount of thyroxine. Because when you have too much, you stop making it. When you have too little, you start making it. It's a balancing act. Now, it's quite a complicated little diagram here, but if you know that thyroxine blocks TSH and TSH causes thyroxine, then you can kind of work it out for yourself. Now, this is a feedback loop. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to draw this diagram, and I'd like you to, if you can without going back, fill in this diagram. If you forget a stage, then you can skip back a little bit and find out about it. But try your best to work out logically for yourself what actually is happening here. Because if you can work out logically yourself, it will get stuck in your head a lot better. So pause me, draw this, fill it in, please. 2 minutes. Right. So again, hopefully you wrote too much thyroxine blocks TSH. So less thyroxine is produced, so you have too little thyroxine, so TSH increases, so you have more thyroxine. And this whole thing is called a negative feedback loop. Why negative feedback? Because we're having feedback where we create a chemical which then blocks the start of the chain. So we have a chain where we go TSH leads to thyroxine, and then that feeds back and blocks TSH. So this is a negative feedback loop, meaning that the end of this chemical pathway, the product, thyroxine, then goes and blocks the start of that pathway. Okay? You can think of it a factory who creates robots, and the end robot then goes back to the start of the factory and turns it off. You're creating a chemical, one of whose job is to go and turn off the creation of that chemical. That means you can never have too much, that's a lie, that means you should never have too much thyroxine in your blood. You should never, because the moment you have too much thyroxine in your blood, it should go back and stop TSH and stop any more thyroxine being made. These are notes I would like you to write, and you have to know what a negative feedback loop is. That is a key paragraph there, because a lot of the hormones we're going to talk about, starting with blood sugar homeostasis next week, are going to involve negative feedback loops. So write down those notes, pause me again. Right. Now, some questions, and that really is it. Okay, this should be quite a short one this week, as far as I can see. There's not a huge amount in this lesson. It's a nice, simple, short one. So have a look at this question. This is a 1 marker. I'm not actually going to ask you to pause me at all. It says control systems help to keep conditions in the human body constant. What's the general name for processes that keep body conditions constant? Eutrophication, homeostasis, or hydrotropism? Now, you haven't heard of eutrophication or hydrotropism yet, most likely, and so we know the answer must be homeostasis, and hopefully you would know that anyway. Now, this is a more interesting question. Now, whether you're going to get all 3 marks on this point is questionable. There's definitely 2 you can easily get, and the third one will get easier and easier as we get through the course. So, it says hyperthyroidism is caused by an overactive thyroid gland. What's going to happen in the body of a person with hyperthyroidism? And there's 3 marks here. So, bullet point this, please. What did we say would happen if you had too much of what the thyroid gland makes? Right. Hopefully you have an answer down. So we said thyroid gland, an overactive thyroid gland. We said the thyroid gland makes thyroxine. And the first mark is for saying too much thyroxine. That's a mark. The second mark is for saying, and this BMR stands for basal metabolic rate. So if you showed which raises the metabolic rate, that's the second mark. And this third mark, again, whether I expect you to write this at this point is questionable. We're definitely going to talk a lot about the different things the metabolic rate will do over the course of the next few weeks. So don't worry if you didn't get this one. But the kind of idea of the kind of thing that's going to happen is you're going to increase respiration, increase the production of various chemicals, increase breaking down various chemicals. But I definitely want you to be getting the first 2 marks at this point, that if you have an overactive thyroid, as in the question, you'll have lots of thyroxine, which leads to an increase in the basal metabolic rate, or just the metabolic rate will do you just fine. So, that's it. So let me talk you through what you absolutely have to know. You've probably got time to go back and study anything you really struggled with. So, the first one is define the term negative feedback. And that is the paragraph we wrote down, that it's a loop in which the end chemical prevents the start of the chemical pathway. So the thing you're creating then stops itself being created. Explain the role of adrenaline in the body. We said that that is going to increase your heart rate, increase your blood sugar levels, blood glucose levels, in order to allow you to fight or flight or do whatever. Explain how thyroxine is controlled in the body. We talked about this negative feedback loop, and we wrote that little diagram down. Make sure you know that. That is very important to know. And if you don't really understand it properly, at the very least, make sure you've memorized it, and we can make sure we understand it going forward. And how thyroxine levels affect the body, and that's just knowing that thyroxine will increase the metabolic rate. So a nice short one today, gives you an extra, I don't know, 10-15 minutes, is it, to relax. Next lesson, I promise we really will do blood sugar homeostasis, one of my favourite lessons of the year, so tune in for that one, obviously. And whoever's disliked my last video, don't do that. So it's depressing. Right, I hope you have a very good day, and no doubt I will see you all in the not too distant future.